Many in the United States have heard of the Boston Massacre as an unjust killing of American colonists, but what actually happened? As usual, history is a little vague on the details as both sides claimed no wrongdoing. It's no secret that during the 1770s, many American colonists were outraged with the laws Britain implemented in the colonies. But Boston, as one of the most influential political, economic, and cultural cities in the 13 colonies, was the center of resistance to British acts of taxation. Since the colonists in Boston were so volatile, Lord Hillsborough told General Thomas Gage to send such force as you shall think necessary to Boston. So over 2,000 British soldiers occupied the city. The increased British presence led to more clashes, with one even killing an 11-year-old boy, Christopher Sider. This killing sparked even more rage in the colonies, making even more of the colonists ready to harass and confront British soldiers. On a cold and snowy evening of March 5th, 1770, Private Hugh White stood alone as a guard for the Boston Custom House on King Street. Suddenly, a 13-year-old wig maker's apprentice named Edward Garrick called out to the Captain Lieutenant John Goldfish, who was passing by, accusing him of refusing to pay his master. But while Goldfinch ignored him as he had settled the matter, Private White came to his defense and told Edward that he should be more respectful to the officer. The two exchanged insults, and after Garrick poked Goldfish, White struck him with his musket. As if the situation couldn't get any worse, someone rang the church bell, signaling fire. Over 50 Bostonians flooded around White, led by a mixed-raced former slave named Crispus Atticus. White took up a safer position on the steps of the custom house, but the mob had begun to throw snow, rocks, and ice at him, while also challenging him to fire his weapon. White called for reinforcements, and Captain Thomas Preston dispatched 7 soldiers to reinforce White at the custom house with fixed bayonets. Captain Preston shouted to the crowd for them to disperse, but by then the crowd had grown to 300 to 400. The mob continued to harass the soldiers, taunting them by yelling fire, and continuing to throw objects. Innkeeper Richard Palms came up to Preston with a cudgel, asking if the soldiers' weapons were loaded. Preston said that they were, but that he would not give the order to fire. Suddenly, someone shouted fire behind them, and at the same time a thrown object struck Private Montgomery, knocking him down and causing him to drop his musket. When he recovered, he fired his weapon angrily and shouted, "Damn you, fire." The other soldiers fired, mistakenly believing that Preston gave the order, but when the smoke cleared, 3 were dead: Samuel Gray, James Caldwell, and Crispus Atticus, the only victim of the Boston Massacre whose name became widely known, being memorialized as the first hero of the American Revolution. 5 others were also wounded, but unfortunately Samuel Maverick and Patrick Carr would not live much longer as they died of their wounds. The crowd withdrew from the scene, but still hovered in nearby streets. Governor Thomas Hutchinson arrived on the scene with more men, and Preston and his soldiers were arrested. The event sparked a war, but not the Revolutionary War, that would come later, but a propaganda war. American patriots published media showing the British soldiers brutally murdering innocent civilians, while the British claimed that the mob was to blame. Ironically, future President John Adams defended the men, and although he was a critic of the British, he also was dedicated to the law, hoping to give the men a fair trial. In one of his arguments, Adams called the crowd a motley rabble of saucy boys, Negroes and mulattoes, Irish Teagues, and outlandish Jack Tars. The jury agreed with Adams' arguments and acquitted 6 of the soldiers, while finding Hugh Montgomery and Matthew Kilroy guilty of manslaughter. The convicted soldiers pled benefit of clergy for a lesser sentence for a first offender, which reduced their punishment from a death sentence to the branding of a thumb. Preston said it best when he wrote about the conflict, stating, "None of them was a hero. The victims were troublemakers who got more than they deserved. The soldiers were professionals who shouldn't have panicked. The whole thing shouldn't have happened."